طيب, inshallah, we're going to get started now. بإذن الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. Ameen, ameen. And before we begin with anything else, we'll start with making a dua for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Lebanon, and in other parts and pockets of the Muslim world that are going through affliction, like Sudan and Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan. May Allah Azza wa Jal relieve them all of their difficulties and their calamities. Allahumma ameen. Please join me in the dua, especially for our brothers and sisters in northern part of Gaza who are facing unimaginable difficulties right now. اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت سبحانك كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على حبيبك وعبدك المختار سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم فك ضائقة المسلمين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. فك الكرب عن كل مكروب من أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أنت به عليم. اللهم أصلح أحوال المسلمين في كل مكان. اللهم ول أمورنا خيارنا ولا تول أمورنا شرارنا ولا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك ولا يرحمنا. اللهم لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا. اللهم اجعل الجنة هي دارنا وقرارنا. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في غزة وفلسطين. انصرهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا. اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين. اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين. اللهم انصرهم على القوم الظالمين. اللهم أمددهم بمددك وانصرهم بجند من جندك. اربط على قلوبهم ثبت أقدامهم. اللهم سدد رميهم. اللهم عليك بأعدائهم. اللهم اهزمهم وزلزلهم. فرق جمعهم. اللهم فرق جمعهم. اللهم فرق جمعهم وأفسد رأيهم. اللهم لا تجعل لهم صرفا ولا نصرا. يا قوي يا عزيز يا قوي يا عزيز يا قوي يا عزيز. نسألك بأسمائك الحسنى وصفاتك العليا أن تعجل فيهم نقمتك يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك. اللهم أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك. اللهم أهلكهم كما أهلكت عادا وثمود. اللهم أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك انتصارا لأوليائك وأحبابك. واشف صدور قوم مؤمنين. اللهم اشف صدور قوم مؤمنين. Oh Allah, we call upon you, pray to you, beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to relieve the Ummah of Muhammad ﷺ from its difficulties and its calamities in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Sudan and in Yemen and in Iraq and in other pockets of the Muslim world. Ya Allah, we ask you to grant the Ummah of Muhammad ﷺ relief and ease. Ya Allah, facilitate for us our affairs. Give charge of our affairs to the best of us, not the worst of us. Ya Allah, we ask you to hasten the demise of oppressors. Ya Allah, we ask you to hasten the demise of oppressors. They've transgressed against every boundary, Ya Allah. And they've caused our brothers and sisters in northern Gaza hunger and starvation. They caused them fear and anxiety. We ask you, Allah, to replace that fear and anxiety with security and peace. We ask you, Allah, to replace that hunger with nourishment from by you, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ya Allah, our affairs are in disarray and difficulty. And we have no power to change the status quo, and you're the all-powerful, Ya Allah. We pray that you hasten a matter from by you that changes the status quo, that gives rise to justice and gives demise to injustice, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen, ameen, wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd, jazakumullah khair everyone for attending today for our Friday forum. Last week we had guests with us, Shaykh Amin and Shaykh Nisar, and they were speaking about the journey of seeking knowledge. And the week before that we were off. Now we're back, and it's been a while since we've done a Q&A. So inshallah we'll hopefully be able to have a beneficial hour together in reflecting and in answering different things that come through the Slido. Before we go any further, I'm going to pass it over to my dear brother Adam to share some announcements and to start us off. And before we do the questions, I'm going to share with you guys a few reflections on what's happening as of now some things that we mentioned in the khutbah earlier today, bidnillahi ta'ala. So I'm going to pass it off to Ustaz Adam. Please share with them the announcements.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Just a few housekeeping items, which I'm sure many of you have been here before. So you know we have snacks on both sides. Please keep questions generally respectful. And also, if you're going to have any conversations, try and keep it outside of the main musalla, in the side rooms. But even if you're in the side room, try and keep it at a lower volume so that we don't interrupt the program. Just a few reminders on some upcoming stuff in the community. We have a fundraising banquet going on tomorrow at 6 p.m. It's in New York. You can find everything that I'm mentioning, by the way, on the ICPC email or in the WhatsApp group. So it's going to be a fundraiser. All the our beloved Shaykh Osamah will be there, and along with a few other speakers. And then on Sunday we have our beloved Amwa Fikri will be having a hike at the Rampo Reservation, 10:30 a.m. If you haven't been to one of those hikes, I highly recommend attending. Lots of brotherhood, lots of love, just a great way of building connections within the community. Also at ICPC Patterson, starting brand new, they have what they're calling Cook, Connect, and Create Lifelong Friendships. So it's essentially cooking lessons, Tuesdays, 11 a.m., ICPC Patterson. And again, a great way to build connections with your fellow sisters in the community, inshallah. Beyond that, no other announcements, so I'm going to pass it off to our beloved Shaykh. We do have one more thing, which is the New Muslims Monthly Social, and we're actually relaunching this. It's going to begin Saturday, November 2nd, 5:30 in ICPC Patterson. So if you know any converts, I highly recommend that you let them know about it, because one of the things with converts is you want to make sure that they have all the resources available to them, and being around other converts who understand their circumstances helps greatly. Inshallah, Shaykh.
Jazakallah khair, Ustaz Adam. Allah yahfadak, ya Rabbi, barik feek. So as you heard, there's a lot of things happening at the Masjid, alhamdulillah, and you can find this all on the website or on the Facebook page. Last week there is something that I do also want to reference that happened, something very special for our community. There was a fundraiser that wasn't scheduled to happen at ICPC, but alhamdulillah, because of a turn of events right before the fundraiser, it happened at ICPC. And mashallah, it was a major success. It was hosted by an organization called Humanity. It was in ICPC Patterson, and they gathered 1.2 million for Gaza. It was a night of love for Gaza. We had Shaykh Yasir Qadi, Shaykh Yasir Fahmi, and some other shuyukh that were with us. So this is a big blessing. Say takbir. Allahu Akbar. Takbir. Allahu Akbar. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us as a community always one that stands up for the critical causes of the ummah, that cares about what's happening around the world, and that's invested in the success of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Lebanon, and otherwhere, inshaAllah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better the situation. Allahumma ameen. I did want to share, we wanted to make it a Q&A, and I'm going to spend most of the time with that. But I did want to share a few thoughts, because things around the world are getting more and more difficult. And we are in very uncertain times. We're about to witness a presidential election that we as a Muslim community aren't really hopeful for. And, Ustaz Adam and I were just talking about this before we started, and I think everyone's feeling this sentiment. $17.9 billion later, and that's exactly how much the current administration, led by Biden, gave to Israel in this year-long war against Gaza. 17.9 billion in 1 year to Israel and to Israel's army that's pummeling Gaza with bombs and missiles and everything. We as a community grew past the false notion of banking so much hope on one party, because when they told us the lesser of two evils, we saw the lesser of two evils. The past 4 years, nearly 100,000 people between being lost, killed, injured, or more in Gaza. And this is the lesser of the two evils. La'natullahi ala al-zalimeen. The reason why we're not hopeful for the elections is because of the corrupt setting in which it's happening. Regardless of whether you vote for this party or that party, the two major parties, American politics has been corrupted by Zionism. It's been ruled by lobbying. It's been ruled by lobbying. Our votes are canceled out by special interests and people, trying to apply pressure to people who want to get elected so that they can get what they want. All right? Human opportunism at its finest. That's what politics is today, unfortunately. And it doesn't mean that I'm telling you don't vote, but we as a community have learned better than wanting to aspire to have some Muslim's name in office that's completely bankrupt and disassociated with Islam and its teachings. And I really think that the present moment, more than ever, calls us to be people who are deeply invested spiritually. Deeply invested spiritually. This was something I was reflecting on in the khutbah today. There's a certain point in life experiences where we are faced with the reality that we are in utter need of divine intervention because everything at our disposal is rendered useless or is rendered of little effect on the status quo. And this is when the believer goes from alam al-asbab and the realm of causes to alam al-i'timad ala rabb al-asbab wa musabbib al-asbab, to the realm of utter dependence on the causer of causes, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And we see this happening in the life of the Prophet ﷺ in different scenes, when the Prophet ﷺ actually, instead of being kind, compassionate, cordial, merciful, empathetic, he was very stern in his prayers against oppressors. There's one of these instances when the Prophet ﷺ grew very angry with Quraysh for their mockery of revelation and guidance and their abuse of power, that he said the following words: Allahumma shdud wat'ataka ala mudar waj'alha alayhim sinin ka sinini Yusuf. Oh Allah, make your dominance over Mudar, over Quraysh, very, very evident, and make it upon them years like the years of Yusuf alayhi salam, meaning years of famine and drought and difficulty. So dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other situations, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we mentioned this story, in this massacre that happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ in this area called Bi'r Ma'una. How many of you have heard of this one before? Any of you heard of it? One person? Many people don't know about this. Bi'r Ma'una, two people. Bi'r Ma'una was when these 4 Arab tribes told the Prophet ﷺ that they have become Muslim. These tribes, Banu Lahyan, Usayya, and Ru'al and Dhakwan. These are the 4 tribes. They came and announced their Islam to the Prophet, and they're actually lying. They asked the Prophet ﷺ to send with them teachers so that they could take them back to their people and convey the message of Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ sent 70 of the Ansar, who were known for their devotion and their ibadah. They were referred to as al-Qurra, because they would pray throughout the entire night and they had laborsome work during the day. And then when they got to this area known as Bi'r Ma'una, they massacred them. They killed them all. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard about what happened, he made dua against these tribes for an entire month. He was saying, Allahumma il'an Bani Lahyan. Oh Allah, send your la'na upon Bani Lahyan and on Ru'al and Dhakwan. So there's this other side of the Prophet ﷺ's life where the Prophet ﷺ made dua against oppressors. Just as Sayyidina Musa ﷺ made this dua against oppressors too. One of the scariest du'as against the oppressors we find in the Quran is the dua of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam says, as is in Surah Yunus, ربنا إنك آتيت فرعون وملأه زينة وأموالا في الحياة الدنيا ربنا ليضلوا عن سبيلك. Then he says, ربنا اطمس على أموالهم واشدد على قلوبهم فلا يؤمنوا حتى يروا العذاب الأليم. This scary dua of Musa alayhi salam, where he says, "Oh Allah, you've given Fir'aun and his people wealth and affluence and power so that they may misguide away from your path." And then he says, "Oh Allah, render their wealth useless." He says, "Allahumma tmis ala, Rabbana tmis ala amwalihim." What does that mean? Render it useless. It's very convenient when you can send billions of dollars worth of bombs on people, and then you find Big Brother to bail you out and give you American tax dollars so that you can continue to fuel your economy. Very convenient. La'natullah ala zalimeen. So he said, "Oh Allah, render their wealth useless and make their hearts hard, for these people will not believe until they see the painful punishment." And that's why, and we say this wholeheartedly, so that's why right now it's the time for having a very spiritual disposition, brothers and sisters. If you feel hopeless and helpless for what's happening around the world, if you're like me and you don't really have many big hopes in the presidential elections that are around the corner, then turn to Allah Azza wa Jal. As the prophets teach us to turn to Allah Azza wa Jal in very difficult times. Allah is the one who's capable of showing us His signs in those people who have no regard for any of His boundaries. The scary thing is that the oppression has peaked to a level. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, during his entire lifetime, there was a few massacres here and there. But for us in this day and age, if we were to just try to list the massacres that have happened in the past week in just Jabalia and Beit Lahiya, and if you don't know those areas, go read about northern Gaza. Go read about it. People starving to death, and these criminals destroying hospitals, sieging hospitals, and destroying schools, and killing people by the hundreds. This is happening on a daily basis, not one massacre, not two. And I shared some of these, last week we shared the scene in the khutbah about the person, the group of people who burned to death in the tents around the hospital. And our brother Sha'ban, who still had the IV in his hand, and he was shown on camera, burning to death, him and some of his other family members. And we also saw the video of that young teenage boy who was targeted by an airstrike, and he was injured, and they were trying to go to his refuge. How many of you saw that video? Did any of you see that video? They were trying to go to his refuge, and they couldn't get near him because the drones over were threatening that they would strike again. And they did strike again. Some people actually tried to help him, and they struck again, and they injured and killed many more. And he just died screaming. A'udhu billah. So when you see oppression to this height, know that the perpetrators of this, they are going to face some divine wrath. And we pray that Allah shows us His signs. And Netanyahu and his army, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Say Ameen. Say Ameen, Ya Allah. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us faraj. But brothers and sisters, anyone who's not making dua day and night against the oppressors of our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Lebanon has neglected their right on us. Anyone who's not investing in building a strong spiritual link with Allah right now is someone who's deeply heedless of the present moment. Because we really don't know what's waiting around the corner. We don't know how dark it could possibly get before things change. The Prophet ﷺ tells us about the end of times that the difficulties will be so great that a person will pass by a grave, and he will put his body along the dirt on the top of this grave. يَتَمَرَّغْ فِي هَذَا التُّرَابِ وَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي مَكَانَهُ. I wish I was in his place, from how difficult trials would be at that time. So this is just a reminder. I don't want to take longer than that, and it's going to turn into a lecture. But may Allah Azza wa Jal help us, and inshallah maybe perhaps more, we'll talk more about this next week, and we'll spend the rest of the time in Q&A inshallah ta'ala. Hopefully that triggered some thoughts on questions.
inshallah.
Or
Yeah.
maybe it didn't. Who knows?
And just a reminder for everybody that we don't have a specific topic today. So today's an AMA, so feel free to, throw at us any questions that you might have. First question we have, Sheikh, and I'm going to combine two questions here. I'll give you two in one, just because they're semi-related. How to avoid tabarruj in this day and age? And then the second one is, what is the awra between women? And how
So one more time, how do we avoid tabarruj?
tabarruj? Am I butchering it?
How do we avoid tabarruj in this day and age?
Yeah.
By dressing properly. All right. So, طيب, Bismillah. What is tabarruj? Tabarruj is inappropriately dressing, and it's a term that's often used to communicate a woman not adhering to the Islamic dress code in some way or another, either by not fully covering the awra or by presenting some sort of zina and beauty that should not be presented in the manner that is presented. And just as, so that's the term tabarruj. Now, as for the term awra, it is your private area, not the area that must be covered Islamically. And just as there is a awra for men, there is a awra for women. And this awra increases and decreases depending on those in attendance in any gathering, any given gathering. So the awra of women between each other is different than the awra of a woman in the presence of her maharim, is different than the awra between a husband and a wife, and so on and so forth, and men with each other. So the whole idea and concept behind awra is to protect society from fitna. And what is fitna? It is illicit attraction between genders. Illicit, what does that mean? Wrongful attraction, something that should not be triggered or sparked between people who are not married and either can't get married or aren't planning on getting married, right? Or are not direct family members. So this is what awra, the purpose of awra. It's to avoid fitna from happening between people. Because Allah Azza wa Jal created us and designed us in a way where there is naturally an attraction between the genders. And there must be certain guidelines adhered to when we're in a mixed gender setting. And when these boundaries are not heeded, it often leads to very problematic things. And our society is a great witness to this. All of the situations where sexual assault happens, where people complain about certain boundaries being wrongfully breached. It all emphasizes the wisdom that Islam has put in place in there being guidelines when genders are mixed with each other, right? So that being said, of course, I have no authority as a person in this day and age and control over a lot of the things that happen around me. So it is very true and very possible that you as a guy or as a sister may be in a reality where there are toxic influencers that you cannot change, whether you're talking about at work or at school. And the best thing that you could possibly do is to protect your honor and your guard, and to try to limit your exposure to those things that displease Allah Azza wa Jal as best as possible. Now, you can't go ahead and impose anything, a dress code on people. You can't do that. But what can you do? The brothers and sisters are instructed in the Quran to lower their gaze. Lowering the gaze is not a guy thing, right? Lowering the gaze is for guys and girls, right? Especially when the gaze is one that is lustful. Especially when that's the case, it must be avoided. And in general, I should limit my exposure to that as much as possible because we're human beings, right? So these are things that we learn from our deen. If you're forced to be in a reality that you don't necessarily approve of in certain situations, then try your best to avoid having that affect you. That's my advice in that regard. Now, what was the second question?
The second question is specifically the awra between women, what they're
What
allowed
is
to
the
see.
awra between women? All right. So one of the things, in general, when you're talking about a woman in the presence of another woman, the woman can expose certain things, provided that certain things we're rest assured of them. So we tell this to sisters because now everyone has a camera on them now. That's why even when we have parties, we tell sisters, be very careful. Unless you're going to someone's house and you trust that person very, very well, make sure that you're very mindful and thoughtful of when you expose the awra that you would normally be allowed to expose in the presence of another woman, like your hair, like your arms, like your feet, like so on and so forth. Because unfortunately, there are people who do not have amana, who would take pictures, take video, and they would share that with others wrongfully. So my advice to sisters is extremely limit what you expose from your awra out of protecting your image and protecting yourself from being exposed to people, especially in this day and age. Limit it to the tightest of circles. That's why they actually mentioned this in the books of fiqh. They said the awra of a woman in the presence of those who fear, of other women who fear Allah, is, again, and everything is allowed to be exposed except the awra that is mughallada, the augmented awra, the private area. But that's in the presence of those who fear Allah. Now, if you can't ascertain that or confirm that, then we revert to being precautious and you limit the exposure of your awra even in parties and celebrations as best as you possibly can. Wallahu a'lam.
Shaykh, if I might add, actually, you brought up, this idea that, everybody has a phone nowadays. Anybody can take a photo.
Yes.
And just to give an example that I know of, just so all the, I guess this is more for the sisters from my own, experiences. You'll find yourself going to, parties where they have the phone coverings that block the cameras. But I know, and I've seen firsthand of circumstances where, you might be going to this party, you might trust the individual, that who invited you, but the circumstance that I came across was that people actually took the time to tear apart those security devices to get their devices out. And so, Sheikh's, point really rings true, which is, it pays to be careful. You can't, unfortunately, we're not in a situation where we can necessarily trust everybody, especially in these large party environments.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Allah yabarik feek. You have a follow-up? Go ahead. If you are in a public bathroom, yes. Look, obviously, if you need to make wudu in a public bathroom and another sister who's non-Muslim, you're saying, would walk in, obviously in certain situations you need to do what you need to do. But try to limit it as best as possible. And, just try, for the purpose of what? Protecting your image from being shared with others, and so on and so forth. So, saddidu wa qaribu. If you need to make wudu, and you need to do it in a public restroom, then that's fine. Just do it very quickly and try to limit what you expose. And realize that in some madhahib, you don't really need to take off your whole hijab to make wudu. Like in the Shafi'i school, even if you were to wipe part of your hair, this is sufficient. Yeah. Jazakallah khair.
Shaykh, I have a marriage-related question for you.
Okay.
How to go about marriage? So essentially the question is, if you have some type of past, are you required to, expose that past to your spouse, whether you're a woman or a man?
If you,
let's say you
to your
committed
spouse or to someone you're considering?
To a potential spouse.
All right. So if we get this question a lot, if someone has a past before they get married, and now they want to get married, do they have to tell everyone that they consider about this past? The answer is you need to, first off, don't share your sins with people. Don't publicize that. It'll not lead to a good result. Don't do that. But what can you do? You can try to gauge the conversation in a subtle way to see if this person is someone who cares about the past or not. Some people, they're very clear from the get-go that, I want to start a new page in my life and I'm looking for someone to do the same, and whatever is in the past is in the past, I want to start on a new page. That type of person is the ideal candidate for someone who has a past. Now, this is you, because there's two things we're trying to balance here, right? What are the two things we're trying to balance? On one end, the person that you're considering for marriage has a right that, especially if you're someone who's committed certain major sins, and those things are things you can't take back. Sometimes, I know people in these types of situations that have come to me in the past, like if they have committed some haram act and they contracted an STD. Right now, what's going to happen if this person gets married? It's going to be transmitted to the next person. Well, how can I oppress another human being through that? I can't. But if the situation is one that you gauge from the conversation that this person is not one who cares about investigating the past of yours or sharing their own past, whether you're a guy or a girl, then this is probably the one that you should proceed with. You should gauge the conversation subtly. Because what happens if you share a past that you had, then a person may expose their secrets to dozens of individuals by the time they actually get married, and half the community would find out that fulan or fulana committed X, Y, or Z sin, and it would be very disgraceful. And the instruction that we learn from our fiqh and from our deen is that you should not disgrace yourself with the commission of a sin, except it's in the context of advice and counseling, if you're seeking advice or guidance on how to manage a situation. So that's my advice to people in that situation. This is how we balance that. If someone cares about the past, I understand, but then that's probably not the ideal candidate for you. Don't share the past, because no matter what you do, it's going to cause mistrust with any person that you present yourself to. Or 9 out of 10 people. 9 out of 10 people, if you share with them the past that you committed, whether you're a guy or a girl, it will all cause all kinds of problems in the beginning of that relationship. And very often, from what I've seen, it causes the end of that relationship. Because the mistrust is just too difficult to get past. Wallahu alam.
Can I add another question to that, Shaykh?
Sure.
If you don't mind. What about, let's say, for example, you're in a circumstance where the community, perhaps at large, already knows about this, thing that you've done, but the person that you're engaging with doesn't. Would it then be appropriate to share that up front?
The person, well, no, like I said, don't, because it's not just for the consideration of the community, it's also for the consideration of this relationship. So if someone finds that the person that you're considering cares about the past, just let the conversation run till its end and say, I need to excuse myself, and don't give the reason for that. But under no circumstance should you share that past. And I understand you should also not force and impose that past on someone who doesn't want to be in that type of relationship. Someone who's guarded and protected their honor for their lifetime is looking for someone who has a similar experience in life and actually cares about that. Fine, you could respect that, but this is how we balance between these two realities. Wallahu alam.
So now, from a revert in our community, they have family members that aren't Muslim, and they'd like to know if they donate in their name, will they receive reward for that?
All right, a revert in the community has family members who are non-Muslim and wants to know if they donate in their name.
Yes.
Will they receive the reward for that? Look, the biggest foundation for accountability in the akhirah is belief in Allah Azza wa Jal. And my heart goes out to anyone who has family members who don't believe. And as long as they're still alive and in this dunya, continue to pray to Allah Azza wa Jal day and night for them to believe. If you want to give a charity for the hope that, Ya Allah, you allow this person with the intention and with the niyyah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the heart of my family member, mother, father, sibling, or whoever to Islam, then go ahead, give that charity for that purpose and that intention. Go ahead, do that. Will they get the reward? Well, look, reward is useless for someone who received the message and then rejected it and died upon that. right? Reward's useless. There's no, the Prophet ﷺ tells us very clearly and unequivocally, whoever hears of my message and then disbelieves in it will not be admitted into Jannah. Now, can I apply that to individuals? No, I can't. I apply this in general. Beyond that, how does it apply to the individuals? Allah knows best about that. But don't worry about the rewards of something in the details of Islam. Worry about them accepting Islam to begin with. Because if they don't, then that is the biggest obstacle in terms of otherworldly accountability. Wallahu a'lam. We could also take direct questions if anyone has it. Does anyone have a direct question that they would like to ask?
I have a young brother over here. Go ahead.
Taha.
Taha.
Does it count as you saying it too? Jazakallah khair. Very good question, Taha. So he said, if we repeat du'as that prophets made, does it count as we said it too? Or is it just us repeating what they said? So the answer to this is, the best du'a is the du'a of the Qur'an. We should learn those du'as in the Qur'an and incorporate them in our du'a. The second best type of du'a is the du'a in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We should memorize those du'a and incorporate them in our du'a. After that, any du'a that Allah inspires you to say comes third, right? So no, absolutely. When you say du'a that a prophet said, or our prophet said, it's like you said it, especially if you learn what it means, right? And this is something that we all should do. We should learn the du'as in the Qur'an and in the sunnah. Jazakallah khair for your question. Allah barik feek. Does anyone else, any other direct questions, guys? Any other direct questions?
Okay, back to the Slido. Shaykh, could you please clarify the proper ihram attire for women specifically? And then they have a more specific question, which is, could women wear grip socks during tawaf if they are diabetic and prone to bleeding?
Yeah, there's no clothing restriction for women for ihram. The clothing restriction and guidelines that we have are for men, not for women, right? As for women, the guidelines for them are to make sure that they wear full libas and clothing that covers the awrah. Make sure of this. Make sure that it's proper libas and fully covering the awrah. Because if it doesn't, then we're talking about multiplied sin. You know, it's one thing to not wear proper clothing anywhere else in the world, but when I dare do that in the presence of the Kaaba, then the offense takes on a greater nature. Just as if someone was to swear or to curse or to steal in the vicinity of the Kaaba, it has much more severe consequence. Same thing about clothing. So that's the only thing I would say about that. For ihram, there's no requirement for women to adhere to a certain dress besides the dress that covers the awrah fully. Wallahu alam. So yeah, you could wear those socks. There's no problem.
Now, what to do if you find out your sibling, child, friend, or perhaps anybody who you're close with is in a relationship that they shouldn't be, and how can you guide them out of it?
What to do if your sibling or your child's in a relationship that they shouldn't be?
Sibling, child, friend, anybody close to you, I suppose.
So look, you can't really address this type of question in a general way. Each situation is going to be different. How old is this person? How much influence do you have over them? What are the ways of intervention? All of this is going to affect. If you're a mother or father and your child's younger, like you're talking about late teens, 20s or something like that, it's very different than if you're a mother or father and you're talking about someone in their 40s and this son or daughter that you have don't really listen to you and they're in their 40s. Or they're a sibling and there's very little you could do to stop this person. It depends on the stage, like what's the state of their iman too. Like for some people, they may be in an illicit relationship and they're hardly Muslim. That you're scared to ask certain questions because this person might have severe doubts about Islam. That's why I need to be wise and thoughtful in the way I deal with things. I need to be able to assess the reality in front of me. If I'm presented with a reality where a sister, for example, isn't wearing hijab, but she's having severe doubts about Allah, which problem do you think I'm going to address first? Which problem do you think I'm going to address first? You think I'm going to waste all the time and energy trying to compel her to wear hijab if she doesn't believe in Allah? Right? I need to resolve the fundamental issue, right? It's like a heart attack versus a headache. Or I'm not going to call not wearing hijab a headache, it's a severe sin. But you get the picture. Not believing in Allah is as bad as it gets. So I need to be very wise and thoughtful in terms of the problems I'm addressing. So da'wah needs a lot of hikmah, needs a lot of wisdom. And sometimes if you try to resolve it, it's not like if a third party tries to resolve it. Sometimes, and I advise families to do this, the best thing you could try to do is convince your family member to sit down with somebody, an impartial third party, who could give them advice. Because sometimes when it's coming from family, it's not really well received, unfortunately. Children are not willing to listen to their parents. Siblings may not really be able to sway their siblings. But if it comes from someone of authority or someone with wisdom, someone who's foreign to the issue, there's no emotional attachment, maybe perhaps they could say something that could penetrate this person's heart. So that would be my advice for this person. You need to read the situation properly and maybe perhaps in this situation get the advice of a third party. Wallahu a'lam.
Shaykh, I have a question in reference to one of your classes, and the questioner states, in your class we spoke of reconciliation.
Can you bring it closer?
Oh, sure. The question states, in your class we spoke of reconciliation. When should one reconcile between two parties and when to refrain? Since we should leave matters that, and since when should we leave matters that do not concern us? At what point do we just say, this is not something that concerns us, let me walk away?
Look, it's really when, in most situations, that would be my response. Without knowing exactly what you're referring to, like, someone might come to me, well, okay, look, I'm a son or a daughter, and the two individuals that I hope I could reconcile between are my mother and my father. And they may have been at odds with each other for decades, and they've never saw eye to eye, and now they're older in age, and no matter how many times I've tried to bring them closer together, they're not willing to come closer together. There are certain situations maybe perhaps I can't fix, right? That's possible. I've tried to reconcile between both parties, but whenever I try to do that, it gets worse. So it really depends on what you're talking about. So in most situations, I would say that's the directive. The believer needs to, and like we said, the hadith says, yunmi khayran, right? Namima, right? There's the bad namima, and then there's reverse namima. What's reverse namima? When you go to both parties and you say a lie to bring their hearts closer together, right? So that's what you should do in most situations, between friends, between family. Whenever you can be this force that brings people closer together, it is your business to do that, right? Don't mind your own business and leave people in their problems. No. But if it's the situation that me getting involved is going to make it worse, and I'm not really going to be able to bring these two parties closer together, or I've tried and I failed many times over, then maybe perhaps I can't play that type of role in that situation. Wallahu a'lam. So it really depends. Yeah.
Any questions in the crowd?
Any direct questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Shaykh, this is about a brother or sister who's traveling for work, and
Okay.
they work in New York, and so their question goes as follows. Is there a specific number of miles I need to travel to shorten my prayer, or alternatively, is there a mileage for one way or both way? How is it considered for me to be able to shorten my prayer? He says he travels over 45 miles to the city for work.
Yeah, over 45 miles to the city for work. Is that what you said? All right.
Yes.
So look, in terms of the minimum duration for you to be considered a traveler, there are different viewpoints among the scholars about this. When am I considered musafir? When am I considered musafir? According to the Shafi'i school, it is a distance of 51 miles or more in one direction. In one direction. not two directions. يعني مش 25 miles going and 25 miles coming back. 51 miles or more in one direction.
Just a loop around my house for 45
No,
miles.
you can't loop around the house and say, I'm going to look at the Addad until it reaches 51 miles, the odometer, and say, all right, then I am a traveler. No, that's playing games, right? And I can't choose to take the long way on purpose just so I could add a few miles, right? No, it needs to be from the shortest distances. If it's 51 miles or more, then you could shorten. Hanafi school, 48 miles. Maliki school, 36 miles. So according to the Shafi'i school and the Hanafi school, this person would not be able to shorten. Is there any if it's for work, say if someone drives 70 miles for work every single day, can they shorten at work, shorten and combine at work? Yeah, they're musafirs. If it's their work is 70 miles away and they drive an hour and a half commute, then fine, no problem. Even if it's every single day and you're traveling to work a far distance, you can shorten and combine if you meet the requirement for it. Wallahu alam. Right. There's a question in the back. Travel questions, by the way, always are like a wormhole, right? They lead us to this endless set of questions. Is it about travel?
You already got another one, actually.
Right? Tfaddal. That you don't do the sunnah? All right. So there are those who say, there's an opinion that says, when you travel, you don't do the sunnah. Because the whole point of shortening and combining is to make it easier for the musafir, so they pray less. There's an opinion that says that. However, the Prophet ﷺ, we know from his sunnah, كَانَ يَتَنَفَّلُ عَلَى الرَّاحِلَ فِي السَّفَرِ. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, when he was traveling on his ride, he would pray nawafil, extra prayers. During travel, right? So that's why there's another opinion that says no. Yes, the shortening and combining is ta'abbudi because there's a wisdom behind it, and that's the difficulty of travel. But because Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said so, that's why we do these things. But in terms of the other nawafil, if someone finds the capacity within them to do those nawafil, go ahead and do it, right? There's no problem with that whatsoever. Is that what you were trying to ask? Good? All right, Jazakallah khair. So the minimum duration, the minimum distance is one thing, and the minimum duration is another thing. What is the minimum duration for travel? Again, something the scholars differed about. If you're asking the Shafi'i school, and that's the one I usually answer from, because that's the one I studied in detail, it is 4 days aside from the day of arrival and departure. So I go, and pay attention to this, I'm going to, I'm going to another state for a week. I arrive there I travel there on Monday, I arrive there on Monday, right? I'm not going to count that day. Please, sisters, if you could just, whoever's talking, if you could just calm down. Jazakallah khair. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 4 days. I leave on Saturday. I'm good. I met the maximum amount that's allotted for travel. So if I'm coming on Monday, leaving on Saturday, I'm good to go. If I'm planning to stay there until Sunday, right? So I came on Monday and I'm staying till Sunday. As soon as I arrive there, I become a temporary resident and I cannot shorten and combine. This is a big misconception by people. Some people think when you go travel, you could shorten and combine for the first 4 days or first 6 days, and then after that you pray the normal prayer. No. If you know you're going to stay there for longer than the maximum duration, which is, like I said, 4 days aside from the day of arrival and the day of departure, then you have to pray the normal prayer as soon as you get there. That's the Shafi'i school. Maliki school says 20 prayers, right? Hanafi school says 15 days. 15 days, but they don't combine. The Hanafi school does not combine. It only shortens prayers, right? There is an opinion that says there's no set day, number of days. There is an opinion that says that, and it's more about this urfi meaning of what travel is, right? This opinion, I know it's held by a respectable figure of our past, but it's not one that I encourage to follow, because some people use this opinion to, when they go travel for school or for for the purpose of medical reasons, they continue to shorten and combine for months, some of them for years, right? And I tell people that's a very slippery slope. I discourage them from following that type of opinion. Wallahu alam. Go ahead. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, so if you're going to stay for a long time in one location, then on the way there, you can shorten and combine without disagreement. Everyone says that. Well, except the Hanafi school doesn't do the combining. But like I said, everyone else, fine, no problem at all. If you're going to be like Ibn Battuta, and you're going to travel to the Far East and the Far West, and you're never going to come back home until after years of travel, right? You guys know Ibn Battuta, right? Ibn Battuta. If you're going to go from city to city, then you could continue to shorten and combine, even if you do that for years on end. If you're not staying in one location for the maximum duration, then you continue to be a traveler. Who usually experiences this most? Truck drivers. Some brothers who are truck drivers and they go for weeks on end traveling, they're shortening and combining. They're continuous travel. They're not staying in one location. So they can continue to shorten and combine without any issue whatsoever, right? Say if, another question I get, since you might ask it, some people go for consulting jobs and they will go for 4 days to a certain location until a project finishes and they'll come back home for 3. Can you ever shorten and combine when you're back home? Answer is no, even if you come back for 24 hours. When you're at home, you don't shorten and combine. Even if you're only staying 3 days at home and you're staying 4 days in state, whatever state it is, for the consultation job, when you're in the job, you could shorten and combine for those 4 days, no problem. But when you come back home, you pray the normal prayer, right?
Shaykh, I have a question for you. So at what point does, where you're at, I suppose if you're, going somewhere, actually, never mind, I answered my own question in my head. I'll leave it there.
Before we move on, any other fiqh-related questions? All right, go ahead. Jazakallah khair for your question. So there are certain salahs that you can shorten. What are they? Dhuhr, Asr, Isha. They're the 4-unit prayers. You shorten them from 4 rak'at to 2 rak'ahs. Can you shorten Maghrib? No, it stays 3 rak'ahs. Can you shorten Fajr? No, stays 2 rak'ahs. Good? Jazakallah khair for your question. Any other question?
I have one right here.
If you owe prayers and you're on vacation, can you make those prayers with 2 rak'ahs or with the normal 4 rak'ahs?
Can you repeat the question?
If you're making up prayers while you're on vacation, so I assume that means you're traveling, can you do those make-up prayers with 2 rak'ahs?
Are they prayers that you missed while traveling or before traveling? All right, no. The good question. It's probably being asked by someone who's not required to pray yet. Allah ihfadak ya Rabb. Jazakallah khair for your hirs. So if you miss a prayer during travel and you make it up during travel, then you can make it up as 2 if it's a 4-unit prayer. If you miss a prayer before travel and you're making it up during travel, you still must pray it as 4 rak'ahs, right? It's a good question, right? If you miss a prayer during travel and you make it up after travel finished, how much do you make it up as? 2 or 4? What do you think? 4. Yeah, 4 rak'ahs, not 2. All right, any other questions about fiqh before we?
I have one with Amma over here.
Allah ihfadak Hajj. Repeat it.
So the question that our beloved Amma was asking is, you complete your prayer here in the Masjid, and as soon as it's over, people just start, yapping, and I suppose then the question is there any associated punishment, disturbing other people in their prayer?
First off, Asfin Hajj. Hajj Anis is upset at the people who come here in the masjid, and after we finish, people want to pray their sunnah, and they disturb them while they're trying to pray their sunnah. They keep talking and talking with a very loud voice. Sorry for the disturbance, and of course, no, this is not good at all. This is very bad akhlaq, first thing. And the second thing is, it's very concerning, because here I am disturbing those who are praying, and there's a hadith that says, لا يشوشن قارئكم على مصليكم. The one who's reading Quran should not disturb the one who's praying. Imagine the one who's laughing and joking. It's a very severe thing, especially if it gets to the point when people can no longer pray with khushu' in the masjid. It's a very scary thing. The Quran says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ. Who's a greater oppressor than someone who's denied the people from being able to remember Allah in the masjid? So I should be very careful with it. One time, the Prophet ﷺ, there was this man who came into the masjid, and he started shouting loudly, "Did anyone see my ride, my animal? I can't find it." He was saying, يَنْشُدُ ضَالَّتَهُ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ. He's trying to find it, and he disturbed everyone while doing that. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "La raddaha Allahu ilayk." May Allah not allow it to be returned to you, right? Because what? You're causing a great disturbance for people in the masjid. So I should be very careful with this. Jazakallah khair for the reminder. Question.
Had another.
Jazakallah khair. So the question, I mentioned 3 mileages for the minimum duration. Can you just follow any of these? Like, how bad is it if you want to take an easier opinion if you're someone who travels a lot? I would just urge, don't be someone who's whimsical. Be very careful not to do it out of hawa. And what does it mean? What's the sign of being whimsical and someone who's just following their desires? If I'm going to follow a certain opinion, I need to follow it to the fullest. So, for example, if this issue shows me that the Maliki school is very appealing, 36 miles, wow, that's amazing, right? I want to follow the Maliki school. But I don't know a thing about the Maliki school. I need to make sure that my salah is valid according to the Maliki school. And I need to realize that there are certain things that would invalidate prayers according to the Maliki school that would, that I may fall into. So if I'm just going to follow the Maliki school when convenient, that is showing me that I'm just following my desires. So how can I know the rest of what the Maliki school teaches? Well, I need to learn that. So if you're someone who doesn't know these opinions, then my advice is follow whatever your mufti tells you. If you go to a certain shaykh for advice on things, then go ask them for guidance on what you should do in your own personal worship. Until you actually spend some time, and we taught this in the masjid here before, there's a series that if you go to the YouTube page, you find a Fiqh of Salah series on the ICPC Clifton YouTube page. We went through all of these ahkam before. So if I'm going to follow an easier opinion, I just need to make sure that I follow it to the fullest. Wallahu a'lam. Jazakallah khair.
Any more questions in the crowd? We have one. I saw the backhand first, so we'll go there.
Is it necessarily haram if you're reading the mushaf while you're laying down? The answer is no. It's not haram. However, you should just try your best to be in the most respectful state possible. But if you're exhausted and by the way, when it comes to nawafil prayers, there's a hadith that tells us praying sitting down is half the reward of praying standing up. And praying lying down is half the reward of praying sitting down. Okay, I could pray lying down? Yeah. You could even pray while you're sleeping in your bed. But as long as you have the wudu and you face the qibla properly. How do you face the qibla while you're lying on your back? By making sure your feet are facing the direction of prayer. right? So there's a way to even pray while you're lying down. So it in itself is not something prohibited, but as long as I'm just doing it in as much of a reverent and respectful state as possible. Wallahu a'lam. What was your question? Jazakallah khair. Is there any special techniques to increase the efficacy of dua? Yes, there is. There's a lot that we learn from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Among these is to be in a state of purity when we make dua. Among them is to face the qibla when we make dua. And among them is to start off by praising Allah and sending salutations on the Prophet ﷺ while we're making dua. Among them is to make your dua as comprehensive as possible. You know, if I make dua in plural form for my brothers and sisters, and I include myself in between them, you know, then it's more likely that it'll be responded to. Because Allah Azza wa Jal will definitely answer the prayers for your brothers and sisters when you're the one making for it. So it's one of the sunnahs of dua is to make it comprehensive, not just about you. And also to repeat your dua, and also to choose the best times to make dua, like after salah, or between adhan and iqamah, or at a certain hour of the night, or right before you break your fast. These are special times to make dua. Another thing that will increase the chances of your dua being accepted is to do dua with full focus. Don't worry about the rhythm and the tone and the tunes as much as what you're saying. Saying it from your heart with sincerity makes it closer to being answered. Repeating the dua multiple times, because the Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna Allah yuhibbul abd al-lahuh." Allah loves the one who is very insistent in asking. So these are, and then one of the most effective ways to make sure your dua is closer to being answered is by purifying yourself from sin. If there's anything wrongful in your life and your lifestyle, that you remove those toxic elements as you're making dua. Because the purer the heart and the more righteous the person, the more accurate their dua will be. So those are some things. Wallahu a'lam. Jazakallah khair for the question.
We have another one in the back.
Are you allowed to pray? So here, the question is, if we can't find a place that's clean to pray, can we pray in our car? What does clean mean? If you're talking about najasa, like you're talking about a park that frequently has people like leaving their the dog poop all over the place or something like that, that's one thing. If you mean by clean, like there's no dirt or something like that, it depends. There's a difference between dirt and najasa, right? The dirt, that's something that we're created from. مِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ وَمِنْهَا نُخْرِجُكُمْ. I have no justification to avoid praying outside if my worry is from the dirt or the rocks or the asphalt or the grass. And you'll definitely, the earth's not covered with najasa, right? You know, if I start thinking, well, what if? Well, I could do what ifs till tomorrow, right? But I should not do what ifs. I'm either certain it has najasa, or I revert back to the default and that it is pure. So if you want to put a tissue, or because you're someone who if you're if you're a germaphobe or something like that, and you don't want to put your head on the ground or something like that, that's different. That's fine. Pray to a towel or a tissue or something like that. That's all fine. There's no issues with any of that. But it not being clean is not enough of a reason to pray in the car. Wallahu a'lam. No, you could pray once the adhan goes off. No problem. Sister over there, you had a question? Yes? What if you're praying at the park and there are men walking? So, sisters praying in public. If your concern for praying in public is your safety, like if you're alone, that's one thing. If there's a chance that someone may attack you or do something or something like that, then that would be a situation that would warrant you praying in the car, but you would need to make it up later on if you're alone. But if you're in a group or if there's general safety, مش عارف إيه, a man seeing your figure, which is covered properly, your aura is covered properly, does not discount your prayer from, what issue is there with that? It happens in the sahn of the haram. When, there isn't no clear women's side in certain parts of the haram, and a woman would pray and men would be able to see her. Is there anything that happens to that prayer? No. All right, it's fine. Any other direct questions? Do we have any? What time is it?
Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll take one more.
Okay. All right, sounds good. This is a question that we've gotten on occasion, and it has to do with our Thursday dhikr and fikr. And the question goes, is there a justification and precedent for group dhikr like we do here on Thursdays?
Is there a justification
Or precedent?
or precedent for group dhikr? Yeah, there are precedents. This is an old debate between people, the scholars of the past having differing views on whether you should do group dhikr or not. It's not something new, but there are justifications because Islam in many instances teaches us to congregate for worship. And it teaches us that doing worship in congregation has special virtue and merit. We do it in our Eid takbirat. We do it in the rain prayers. We do it in the eclipse prayers. It's all mentioned in the Sunnah. When the Prophet ﷺ would lead the companions in a dua when there is great drought, or when there's an eclipse happening. These are things that are documented in the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ making dua and the companions saying Ameen after that. Dua is a form of dhikr. Reading Quran is a form of dhikr. Doing it collectively, is there any issue with that? No, there isn't. Takbirat of Eid, these are clear adhkar that we do collectively. So doing worship in general in congregation is something that its merit has been emphasized in our deen. To come and have a cookie cutter or selective approach to that and say this is allowed and this is not allowed, that's what needs the evidence, right? For someone to tell. So dhikr and dua and Quran are things that are enjoined upon us to do in our deen. And if someone wants to say that there are certain situations where it is prohibited to do that, who needs to bring the evidence? The ones who saying it's prohibited need to bring the evidence. Not the ones who saying allowed, because it's allowed according to default ruling, right? Again, like for example, some people will tell you saying salam after salah is a bid'ah. You can't say salam. It's an innovation. Why? لأنه لم يرد, because the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it. What do you mean? The Prophet ﷺ teaches us to greet each other and say salam to Muslims at all time. I'm doing it all the time. When I come into the masjid, when I'm leaving the masjid, when I see someone downstairs or upstairs or in the back or wherever it is, it's all there, right? So when you want to have this selective attitude to tell me, oh, if you do it after salah, it's a bid'ah, you need to bring the evidence. Right? Wallahu alam. What's up? You want to say something? Saying taqabbal Allah? Can you repeat the question?
I actually didn't
Is
quite get
saying taqabbal Allah the same as saying salam? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I think they probably say it's bid'ah. Yeah. But for us, the definition of bid'ah, for mainstream scholarship in the history of our deen, Islamic scholarship says that bid'ah is something that has been added to the religion, claimed to be part of it, and it challenges one of the principles and foundations that are already set. So dhikr is not something added to the religion. Saying salam is not something added to the religion. It's already there, right? And there is a general, open-ended recommendation to do these things in all states unless otherwise mentioned. Don't do dhikr in the bathroom, right? There is no prohibition of doing it the same time that your brother's doing it, right? What am I doing when I'm doing dhikr? I'm still remembering Allah Azza wa Jalla. Am I worshipping an idol? I'm not worshipping an idol, right? I'm remembering Allah, right? So there's no issue. Say taqabbal Allah after salah. Say assalamu alaikum. Do dhikr at the same time of your brother. In my book, and according to many of our scholars, all of this, there's no issue with it whatsoever. Yes, there is another side that says otherwise, and that's fine. وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ. There will always be difference of opinion among people. And the most important thing is that we remain respectful and mindful, and that we deal with each other in the most honorable way possible as Muslims. So if there are different viewpoints, that's fine. Just don't tarnish another person's image because you don't agree with them. Wallahu a'lam. Any last thing before we conclude? All right, last thing. Go ahead, sister. Did you hear?
Yeah, I believe the question was, how does one let go of justifiable anger or ego towards another individual?
Is that what you said? Okay. How do you let go of justifiable anger or ego in Islam? Look, we would go through the same process. Like, we realize that dealing with people is a struggle. And this struggle sometimes brings out the worst in others. And when it brings out the worst in another, what should it do to me? How should I allow that anger to have its effect on me? And I tell people that this, especially people who deal with trauma, sometimes they start, they become so angry at the person who hurt them that it ends up bringing them down. And this person long moved on from whatever happened and they carried on with their life, but this ends up becoming an anchor. The person who holds this resentment and this grudge inside is hurting themselves way before they hurt the other person. So the way Islam teaches me to do that, the way I could do away with these toxic feelings, because they are toxic feelings, even if they're justifiable, because if I allow them to fester inside me, they will not render a positive result, hence they are toxic feelings, right? Is by embracing the spiritual path. I need to work on this nafs. This nafs needs to be tamed. What does nafs mean? My lower self, my ego, my my wants, my desires, my feelings, my reactions and responses, my attitudes. All of this goes into nafs. I need to tame it. How do I tame it? I tame it through spirituality, through worship, through remembrance of God. I need to know the entry points of the devil to me, right? So if it's justifiable anger, fine. But now, how will the devil exploit this anger to make it disproportionate and lead to a disproportionate response? That's what I'm mindful of as a believer. There's so much more depending on knowing the variables and the circumstance that I could possibly say. But in general, this is how we deal with those types of feelings. Wallahu a'lam. Allah knows best. Jazakumullah khair for the question. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah feekum. Jazakallah khair, Ustaz Adam, for helping and being here to support. May Allah Azza wa Jal reward you all. And inshallah, we're going to stop here. Inshallah, see you guys next week. Bidnillah. Assalamu alaikum.